So welcome everyone. I'm glad to see a full room. We have organized a very interesting event today, I think, with a variety of speakers. I will introduce them shortly. It's good to be together in these times, and it's good to also think about possible futures. Because that is the aim of today. We have been mourning together, and we have been protesting, and we have been crying, screaming. But it's also always it's always good to take time to dream and plan. So today our focus will be on freeing our imagination to think of futures that are better than rebuilding a concentration camp, if we talk about Gaza. But it's also about how we can redesign the space, the whole space between the river and the sea, as a safe and equal space for all, without any displacement and with equality. What do we need to dismantle, to repurpose, and what do we need to build? As I said, we have a full program. At the end, we will have some time for a Q&A as well, questions and answers to the panelists. During the whole event, I will ask you to please keep your questions and remarks to the end. And before the Q&A session, I will also let you know how we will do that. Because it's always good to hear what you're thinking about and to hear your questions. But as we have so many speakers and we have a full program, we also want to get through that. We will start our evening today with Umayya Abu Hanna, our first speaker. She is a Palestinian author. She also was the head of the media department at the Helsinki University of Applied Sciences, a journalist at the Finnish Public Service media company, and a co-founder of Rethink Amsterdam. And she will start us off by explaining why this event, because she was the brains behind them, or the main brains behind them. Second, we will go to this gentleman, Ramzi Nasser, who's an economist and an entrepreneur. He's based in Madrid, and he's also the director of the One Democratic State. He will come back later as well, so we'll hear him twice today. And 3 times if you ask him a question, so that will only make us lucky. Our third speaker will join us online with Zoom, Dean Sharp. So Dean Sharp is a visiting fellow in human geography and environment at the London School of Economics and Political Science. He is a co-editor of Beyond the Square, Urbanism and the Arab Uprisings. But he also co-edited another book that we will discuss today, which is called Open Gaza, Architectures of Hope. Currently, he's working on another volume entitled Reconstruction as Violence, the Case of Syria. After hearing Dean talk about Open Gaza, his book, on Zoom, we will go on to Hans van der Made, our fourth speaker, who is a chief physical planning and urban designer at the municipality of Amsterdam. He's an advisor on the innovation of planning for humanitarian operations. 2 current projects of him one project was the Zaatari refugee camp in Jordan, and another one was the earthquake in Turkey. Then we go again to the screen. We have a pre-recorded intervention by Leopold Lambert, who is a Paris-based architect, writer, and a founding editor. It's better? Should I repeat everything? Okay. So Leopold Lambert, who is a writer and architect, and who wrote various books on the political complications of the environment, settler colonialism, in particular in Palestine and Algeria. So he has a pre-recorded message for us. And then we have some interventions here and there. We have some videos in between that are really meant to make us think and reflect. And as I said at the end, we come back to Ramzi for a few words, and then we open the floor for a Q&A session, when I will also invite Yuval Gal, who will be sitting here instead of me in a few hours. Yuval is an ex-Israeli activist and is also one of the founders of Erev Rav, which is a community of anti-Zionist Jews in the Netherlands. So without further ado, let's start. Again, I ask you to keep any questions and remarks until the end when I open the floor for discussion. And I hope you will all have an intriguing and an intriguing evening. Thank you, Umayya.
Nice to see you all here. Is this microphone? I cannot sit. I have to walk. The reason for having this event was that when a genocide happens, one part is being killed, the other part is sent to the army. And we here are privileged because we are not abducted. If we are only busy with the details of genocide, we are abducted too. And we have to use our power, because we are not being killed, in thinking and not being only reactionary. So what is the opposite of genocide? That was the first thought of planning this event. The opposite of genocide is love. And this event is about producing more love and planning love and living without killing each other. So I start with a video of a friend of mine.
And therefore, I clarify that in any other arrangement, in the future, the State of Israel have to control on the entire area from the river to the sea.
Okay, I'm not very often, I don't often agree with Mr. Netanyahu. On this, I do agree. From the river to the sea is something we can agree on. The expression from the river to the sea cannot make anybody angry. If it is that bad, then we should forbid anybody saying the Netherlands or the lower countries. The space is not the issue. Using this from the river to the sea as an insulting or violent expression is a cover-up for something else, for the real world that is forbidden. We'll get to the real world a little bit later. So what does it take to build a country? In 1.5 hours here, we will not be able to rebuild a country. But what it takes to build any country is the mind. It's the mindset, what you think about humans, what you think about life, and how do humans interact among each other. And this we can. We can think and we can rethink here together. It's an idea. And there's a lot of work against thinking and rethinking this kind of ideas. And one of them is attacking mainly Palestinians who mention equality. Palestinians who demand equality are very often criminalized. And here we show something relating to this event. Here you see Ms. Hannah Luden, who was the director of CD, Center of Information and Documentation on Israel. She labels me in this program as a defender of the 7th of October attacks. She then tags the mayor and vice mayor of Amsterdam. And this, I want to say that labeling Palestinians who demand equality as terrorists is one way of stopping the discussion on. Now we come to the word that is forbidden. What is the word that is forbidden? It's not from the river to the sea. Nobody is angry about space. What is the forbidden word? Equality. So the river to the sea is space. And what is the taboo word? It is equality. And I would rather Ms. Luden and other people say what they stand for. Come out of the closet. Come out with your values. If you believe in supremacy, come out and say, I believe in supremacy. You cannot have values, different values for different people. Say, I believe in supremacy except for. So I would like people to come out with their values instead of saying, you cannot say from the river to the sea or from the tree to the pond. So from the river to the sea has two categories. One is the geography, and the other are humans. Let's see the geography. Urbanism was the first thing that was deleted in Palestine in 1948. We call this herbicide, so it's killing the urban. And if you check what was totally destroyed, for example, the city of Jaffa. In 1948, 96% of the Jaffans were kicked out, and Jaffa was destroyed. Jaffa was the biggest urban city, the richest, and cities produce futures, thinkers, they produce money. And when you destroy cities, you destroy futures. And now we see a similar thing happening in Gaza with the herbicide in addition to a genocide. If you look at Gaza from space today, it will look totally different than the whole rest of our planet. It looks like scorched earth, like burnt, scorched earth. So that is what is going on, herbicide and genocide. So if we check the geography from the river to the sea, what does it include? It includes the state of Israel. It includes the other block, which is the West Bank and Gaza. And the third are the refugees who are around in the surrounding areas. Let's make it clear also that many Palestinians who stayed inside the new country that came on them in Israel are also refugees in their own land. There were many Palestinian refugees whose towns were totally destroyed and are called internal refugees. The city of Nazareth, a third of the city of Nazareth, is made up of refugees. Since 1948, the remaining 130 Palestinian towns in Israel were not allowed to grow bigger in size. Palestinians in Israel were not allowed to establish new towns at all. There are 2 million Palestinians inside Israel, so they are citizens of Israel, of whom 60% live around or under the poverty line. So what is the master plan for this kind of thinking? If you have Israel, the West Bank, Gaza, and refugees. The master plan is disconnection. It's not allowing connection. So for instance, if you're a Palestinian who lives in Israel, you carry Israeli citizenship, you're not allowed to marry another Palestinian from outside unless you leave your country forever. You leave your country until. So disconnection is important. So the master plan is disconnection. If we see some pictures, okay, the next. So there are walls, there are checkpoints, and there are 450,000 Israeli settlers. So you disconnect, you chop up the place. Let's see who are the humans who live in this, from the river to the sea. The history shows us that from the river to the sea was one of the first lands that humans inhabited after they left Africa. And can we have the list? Yeah. Here are some of the people who settled or conquered historic Palestine. The Natufians, the Pharaohs, the Phoenicians, you go on. And each brought new religion, language, culture, so the place was very cosmopolitan. It was, when you speak about historic Palestine, you're speaking about a geography. So Palestine is a geography. It's not a religion. It's not a specific language. It's not DNA. Whoever lives in between the river to the sea can be part of that. The name Palestine was used for the first time in late Bronze Age from 1300 BC onwards, and it relates to the space. And it related to the Philistines, who basically came as sea people. Okay, if we speak about today, what is the situation? The state of Israel is built on the supremacy of the Jewish people, so they rule the land. And it is by their own definition, not my definition, a supremacist state. It's built on what? So, 40% of the Israeli Jews regard themselves secular. Genetics. DNA kits are illegal in Israel according to the Ministry of Health. Think of that, why? And then you don't have to speak Hebrew to be Jewish. A DNA test today might show that the Palestinian Arabs are very much so maybe the old Jews. Maybe the new Jews are killing the old Jews. If you look at me, this is a specimen of a Palestinian, a 62-year-old Palestinian who can trace their roots 2,000 years back. It's not a competition of who's longer, taller, or heavier, but this happens to be a fact. So what needs to be done? A shift of thinking. A shift of thinking, can we have the next one? From tribal laws to tribal thinking and tribal actions to the taboo word, to equality, equal laws, equal thinking, and equal futures. And this is the most dangerous word, the equality word. We were very lucky to have the ambassador of South Africa joining us to speak today, but he called us before the event, and he wanted to personally call because he wanted us to believe his voice has been lost. He was sick, and he sends his love. He uses the word love. And he sent his speech, but we feel we're not the government of South Africa to read it, but I want to apologize on his behalf. The last thing I'm going to say is that this is not a new thing that we are imagining the future of equality from the river to the sea. I call it FRS, new name for the land. The video we're seeing is from something called Regenerating Palestine. It's a rebuilding group of many Palestinian and other architects and urban planners that has been working on rebuilding the whole area equally for everybody. Thank you.
Before we move on to the next speaker, I want to leave you with a few words spoken by Daniel Levy, who was an Israeli advisor and negotiator under Prime Minister Ehud Barak, and Yitzhak Rabin. And he's also the president of the US Middle East Project. So let's just go to him.
My family escaped, on my mother's side, escaped the Holocaust. On my father's side, from Eastern Europe. How can I possibly have the right to go and live there if someone indigenous to that land, whose family was driven from there, does not have that right?
So that's a yes.
I think you could say that.
Too bad we don't know what the question was, but the answer is yes. Then I give the floor to Ramzi. Go ahead.
The question was the right of return.
The question was the right of return. Thank you. Yeah.
Hello? Yeah, they turn it on. Great. Okay. Hi. I think I'll do this seated. Yeah, all right. Stand? Okay, all right. Hello. Good evening. Could I have my first slide? There we go. Okay. No, this is my second presentation. Faisal, could you put my first up?
Spoiler alert.
Jumping ahead. There we go. Thank you. To begin, I want to focus just on Gaza for this talk. And before taking a step forward, I want to take a step back. We're all caught up in such a torrent of news, and it's hard to see the forest from all the trees. So it's a great privilege that we have this space here at the Pack House tonight to take a step back in the middle of a genocide and think. So I want to kind of go through a few different pieces and see how they all fit together. The first piece I want to look at is these different ideas for the Palestinians in Gaza, the residents in Gaza, to be sent elsewhere. There have been various proposals for them to go into the Sinai Desert in Egypt. Is a big project of Netanyahu and his government. They have also had talks to send the Palestinians in Gaza to the Congo or other countries, including Canada. And the question I propose to ask is, does it make sense for the residents in Gaza to leave Palestine? 80% of the population in Gaza are already refugees. So this is a population which has been kept hostage for decades, waiting for their right to go back to their homes. Does it make sense for this 80% of the population of Gaza to be sent elsewhere, to remain as refugees, and to add to them another 20% of the population in Gaza who are not refugees, who are from Gaza, that they should then also become refugees. To send any of the Palestinian residents who are currently in Gaza to the Sinai or the Congo or to Canada does not do anything to resolve their status as refugees or do anything to resolve the fundamental problems and questions in Palestine. So the answer is no. What about rebuilding? There's been a lot of talk about having Saudi Arabia give a lot of money and the UAE to give a lot of money to help rebuild Gaza. But as we know, Israel has a penchant for carpet bombing Gaza every few years. And we're at the point now where no international donors, neither the Europeans nor the Saudis nor anyone else, seems disposed to provide billions of dollars to rebuild a territory that will only be destroyed once again. In Israeli parlance, they call it mowing the lawn. Okay, so if the residents in Gaza are not to go to Canada or the Congo, and perhaps it doesn't make sense to rebuild, then what about this? There are many people who call Gaza a camp of some kind, a concentration camp, a death camp, a prison camp, a refugee camp, whatever definition you choose. Some people find some of these terms more uncomfortable than others. I would say that they all apply, but choose which term you like. If Gaza is a camp, does it make sense to rebuild a temporary space? A space which is, a camp is a temporary place. Does it make sense to rebuild a temporary place, a place that is transient? Faisal. Another topic that seems to come up is this question of a buffer zone. The Israelis are keen to impose a buffer zone on Gaza, but then these maps here, they come from the research of the great Dr. Salman Abu Sitta, who's dedicated his life to researching the geography of Palestine in various ways, which I'll explain a little bit more later. But as you can see, Gaza did have a buffer zone in 1948. And in 1950, that buffer zone was just snatched up by Israel. So considering that Gaza, as we know it today, is already only 1.3% of historic Palestine, does it make sense to have another buffer zone inside Gaza when the area around Gaza was already a buffer zone? If you discount my previous questions about rebuilding and say, okay, you do want to rebuild, then there is this question of logistics. The Norwegian Refugee Council says it will take 7 to 8 years to rebuild Gaza. And it will take at least 1 year just to remove the rubble. So, where should the refugees in Gaza go? If they're not going to go to Congo or Canada or into the desert in Sinai, if they're not going to rebuild a camp and stay as in exile, in transience, in impermanence where they are, if logistically it is inconceivable now to rebuild Gaza, what do we do with this besieged population that doesn't have water, doesn't have food, doesn't have shelter? What shall we do? Well, the best place for the refugees is home. And this is international law. United Nations Resolution 194, as Dr. Abu Sitta reminds us, is something unheard of, unprecedented, an absolute outlier in the history of the United Nations. It has been reaffirmed by the General Assembly more than 130 times in history. There is no other possible right in international law that could be more firmly established than the right of the refugees to return home. What's more, the right of the refugees to return home is a condition of Israel's membership in the United Nations. So here we are. If the residents in Gaza who are refugees are going to return home, where will they go? Instead of just going over the border into a foreign country, Egypt, to go home, you can see on this map, these are the villages they're from, and they are literally within walking distance. We've all seen on TikTok and Instagram the videos of the refugees marching from the north of Gaza down to Rafah in the south. They can literally walk home. And home, there are villages where there's access to water and shelter and buildings that can be much more easily reconstructed than in the rubble of the camp of Gaza that would need to be cleared for at least 1 year. So this map then helps explain the viability of this proposal, this legal, just, practical, logistical, immediately available proposal, which would structurally put an end to issues that have been pending for decades. It's viable because, as we can see on that last slide, 88% of the land in Israel is reserved for military installations, nature reserves, or otherwise vacant. 87% of Israelis live on less than 10% of historic Palestine. So there is room for everybody. And yeah, that's my argument. There's space for everyone. There's water, there's shelter, there's food, and there is structural, permanent resolution of all pending issues if we simply allow the refugees to exercise their international right to, instead of walking south, walk north and return to where they've come from. I want to close on with a little poem. Some of you may know it, some of you may not. It's by June Jordan. She wrote it in 1982. It's called Moving Towards Home. She wrote, "I was born a black woman, and now I am become a Palestinian. Against the relentless laughter of evil, there is less and less living room. And where are my loved ones? It is time to make our way home." Thank you.
I now want to leave you with a few words by Gideon Levy, an Israeli Jewish journalist who is mainly known for his writings in Haaretz newspaper.
And the masquerade contains two assumptions which both are a pure lie. A, that Israel has intention to go for the two-state solution. Israel never had an intention to go for the two-state solution, not even for a single moment. It is really almost historical irony to see now official representatives of Israel coming and defending the two-state solution. What did stop you for 50 years to go for it? Why did you go for it? What are you waiting for? Why didn't you go for it? And if this is not enough, anyone who builds one terrace in the occupied territories has no intention to go for the two-state solution, period. And there was not one single Israeli government who stopped for one day building those criminal settlements. And that's the best proof. And all the rest is a masquerade. Now, the second lie is that the one state doesn't exist. Ladies and gentlemen, the one state exists now for 50 years. The only question is, what kind of state is it? Is it a democracy or is it an apartheid state? That's the only question which is still open.
Okay, then I want to take you to a short interview that I will have with Dean Sharp, who will join us through Zoom. Hi, Dean. Can you hear us and see us?
Yes, can hear you loud and clear, and hopefully you can hear me as well.
Perfect. I hear that you're in Cairo right now.
Yes.
Well, welcome and thank you for joining us. We will have a short conversation with you. And I actually want to start with you telling us a bit about the inspiration behind the book of Open Gaza. Can you tell us a little bit more about where the idea for the book came from?
Yes, of course. Well, thanks so much for having me. Open Gaza Architectures of Hope was initiated by the New York-based architect Michael Sorkin. And this was the third book that he put together on the Israel-Palestine question. The first being shortly after the Oslo Accords, and that moment of hope and around Jerusalem, called Jerusalem Next, that brought Israelis and Palestinians and others together to imagine what a shared Jerusalem was like, and constantly pushed for ways in which we could imagine through the tools of architecture, urban planning, and other spatial disciplines, so what a shared territory could look like. But then as the years went by and all of the arguments kept on getting ignored, the books also got a bit more stringent and critical. So his second book was Against the Wall, that brought together intellectuals and architects again to really protest the erasing and splitting up of the fabric that Ramsey so eloquently also articulated. And then there was the Israeli Operation Protective Edge in 2014 that really outraged Michael and got him to mobilize through his group Terraform, that was an NGO he established in 2005 to think through what the best kind of response was. And for him, it always came out of these type of large-scale collective projects. So and then I was the director then of Terraform, the NGO, where we put these various projects together. And we had several roundtable discussions with Palestinians based in New York and the diaspora, to think how we could collectively respond. And this brought us to the Open Gaza project. And I'm an urban geographer and one that focused on the Arab world for the past 20 years. And we brought, these architects, environmentalists, academics together and produced Open Gaza, which is a book of 22 chapters, and I can take you through some of the ideas in that. But just to go back to the idea of how this idea came about as well, was also to not just document the literal destruction that happened around Operation Protective Edge, but to, with Gazans, produce more forward-looking, hopeful proposals for a more just, equitable, and beautiful urban context. Unfortunately, Michael passed away from COVID in 2020. And so this then also became a kind of legacy statement for his whole work that I think is a really important statement around the Israel-Palestine context in terms of, in spatial terms as well, because this is, as we've seen, a deeply spatial conflict, and many proposals and solutions can also come through how to work out, as again Ramsey pointed out, the shelter and the right return and these very grounded practical questions through urban planning and architectural proposals. So then in 2021 book was published after Michael passed and as the sole editor.
Great. We lost you a little bit in the end, but like I say, I think it's great that this book also became a legacy for him. Can you indeed tell us a little bit more about the main ideas of the book?
So it's a really eclectic contribution through 22 different authors, many Palestinian, some Israeli and internationals. There are chapters, on one author goes through the different tunnels and detailing the different types of tunnels that existed and why she had to resort to using the tunnels to go and see her family in Gaza. There's a contribution by the author Tarek Bakoni, who talks about the different ways in which Gaza has been shut off by the Israelis through land, sea and air, and the enormous effort that it's taken to shut Palestinian Gazans off. But despite all those efforts, the incredible connection that there is globally for Palestinian Gazans in particular, detailing all the signs of social solidarities that have popped up around the world. There's the contribution by Salim Al-Qudwa, who's a Palestinian Gazan architect, and we briefly saw a picture of one of the affordable housings that he initiated in Gaza, frustrated by many of the international interventions that focused on experimental types of interventions rather than really addressing needs, wants and desires of Gazans themselves, and focusing on the importance of intergenerational and family living and doing cheap and affordable reconstructions. This is one of the completed projects that he did. Another one of the projects that we briefly saw was the Al-Qatan school that was constructed by a Palestinian architect, and just showing the types of things that can be achieved. This project here, where the architect, because again of the blockade, was based in Jerusalem, was never actually able to see or be part of the architectural design process at any form, and to this day has not been able to visit it, and we hope it's still standing. So some of the projects were very grounded and material, even achieved in Gaza. But there were also more speculative projects, thinking through Helga Tawil-Suri, for instance, talks about an internet pigeon network to think through how Palestinian Gazans can be more digitally connected, but out.
We blame...
and NASA...
Yeah. Okay. No, go ahead, go ahead. You were stuck for a little bit.
Oh, sorry. And then finally, just to say, NASA goes... and Yara Sharif, through a visit that they did in 2010 after Operation Cast Lead, another Israeli onslaught on Gaza, did a series of projects around how you can facilitate and enhance the existing capacities and skills within Gaza of using rubble and other techniques to rebuild their homes. So that gives you, I hope, a sign of the different chapters and contributions that are in the book.
Thank you. Maybe in a bit we can have the pictures shown again once and this big screen so everyone can see them, because the images were behind you all and I saw no one looked back. That's fine. So maybe later after Dean talks we can show them once more. And maybe just briefly, Dean, if shortly you can also tell us, now that we're thinking about the future, what are things or ideas from the book that you think we can really use, develop, or rethink and take with us?
Well, one of the outcomes of what is a collective of architects and designers has been an outgrowth of Open Gaza and a new collective led by Nasser Ghazari and Yara Sharif called Architects for Gaza. And they are very much moving forward ideas of what and how we can respond as professionals and humans trying to think through what possibly, as Ramsey was already saying, initial studies of which, are still being done are talking about the rubble removal alone needing to take a year. And in previous rounds of destruction in 2014, for instance, and there's a chapter also on this, on the Gaza reconstruction mechanism that was a tripart agreement between Israel, PA and the UN. You know, there were all sorts of incredible restrictions on materials. So if you can think, I mean, I don't know where that estimate comes from in terms of the 1 year for rubble removal, but if there are restrictions on how many trucks can go in and out, which is very likely. I mean, 1 year might be a very generous estimate. And before, for instance, only 90 were allowed in per day at certain times as a kind of high number. And some materials, for instance, were restricted and not allowed in for 200 days. So it took 2 years before there was even, from 2014, it wasn't until 2016 that really a decent amount of material that was allowed to come in, of cement, aggregate, steel repo bars. So, you know, there was a deliberate control and then a real complex approval process for who was allowed to reconstruct where and on what terms. We're in a context that there's been 70% to date damage and destruction. Even if construction is allowed on terms today, you can see the immense challenge of even thinking about reconstruction, let alone then the demanding a right to the city and a right to reconstruction in a way that allows a more just, sustainable and equitable urban fabric as the only rational and sane way in which people are allowed to fulfill their dignity and justice.
Thank you. So a just, equitable and sustainable rebuilding. Thank you, Dean. Maybe we can show the pictures one more time as a slide as well. And Dean, I think you'll stay with us for the Q&A in case there are also questions about your projects. So please stay with us. So this is the
pigeons.
The pigeons?
Yeah, they were pigeons.
The pigeons.
How they can communicate outside Gaza.
So these are all from the book. Yeah, we're done? Okay. Thank you, Dean. Shall we give him a hand? And now we move to our next presentation. Hans, take the floor. Please start with the video.
This is Zaatari Camp in Al Mafraq province in Jordan. It hosts many Syrian refugees, and even more refugees are present in Al Mafraq's towns and cities. Urbanization has accelerated in the crisis and influences the economy, transport, public services, and so on for both Syrians and Jordanians. How does one plan for this area if we do not know what the situation will be like in 2026? How can current work on infrastructure and services also generate longer-term value? A project by the City of Amsterdam and VNG International is adding municipal spatial planning to the humanitarian effort. What does this mean? There are different levels of spatial planning. There is the level of the camp, its grids of roads and sewers, and the location of the hospital, the supermarket, etc. Then there is the level of the camp and its adjacent towns, their connections and layout. Housing here, commerce there, industry there. And there is the level of the province, situated at an international trading crossroads. This is an animated model of the camp made by Amsterdam's Spatial Planning Department. Zaatari Camp gives structure to the space. the camp's infrastructure will remain for a long time after the tents and cabins are gone. Both the camp and the province stand to gain greatly if investments made now remain useful in the future. How fine or coarse should the grid of roads and services be? What are good places for shops and for the hospital? We will still need shops and a hospital if Zaatari camp eventually becomes a residential area. This is what this may look like in 2026. But what if Zaatari camp was to become a transport and logistics center? This is what that may look like in 2026. This illustrates what municipal planners call scenario planning. Spatial plans need to expand rather than constrain Al Mafraq's future options. Investment in the grids needs to balance control with flexibility for people and firms. That way, improvements during the humanitarian emergency can create value for Jordan after the crisis.
This video was showed on the World Humanitarian Summit in 2016. Sorry, I want to be there. And it was meant as an example, as a showcase of how investment in emergency situations should be dealt with in a way that it creates end value. And this video meant that we were invited in many cases afterwards, but that's for later. The Zaatari camp is in the north of Jordan and hosted in the beginning 200,000 refugees. And now it consolidates to 90,000 refugees. And we were asked by the commander of the camp, Kilian Kleinsmith, as planners and architects from Amsterdam, to work on a paradigm shift. He said that the UNHCR, he was from the UNHCR, should go from an emergency situation to a planning situation, how to develop these camps or bring in the conditions to make it develop for better living standards. And I think he has a point. This is Baka in Amman, a Palestine camp in 48 after the Nakba. And it looks like this these days. And we investigated this area and we learned that the structure of this urban area is actually the same as the structure of a tent camp. And that meant too many streets, too few housing capacity, very bad conditions for the vital systems, think of sewage or water. And we also explained that if we would do this in a better way, we could reduce a lot of costs in making these camps. You have to imagine that this camp costed in those days 2.5 million per day. Imagine what it meant to if you have 10 of these camps in the case of Gaza. What we learned also and what we expressed to the investors in these camps is that if you invest in the infrastructure, that's a remaining value. If you target on the cabins and the tents, etc., that's lost money. And we told Jordan that they actually should emphasize the donors to invest in this infrastructure because that's the remaining thing. After the UNHCR has left Jordan, Jordan has to pay for these costs. We also introduced what we call the scenario method, and that's a way to deal with uncertainties. It's not meant like to be acting as a script, this is going to be like this and that. No, it's the other way around. It's what should you do in situations which could occur, which has to do with cases you don't control. So the cases has research done on what could be done. For instance, in Jordan, it's stability or, let's say, making it possible for people to work or not. We did also on a regional scale, and interesting, this was meant as a way to deal with uncertainties, but also to come to an economic development plan. But the Jordanians said, this is risk management. And they said, this is what we need to control the situation and to deal with these uncertainties. What we learned by making mistakes is this diagram actually we as outsiders were asked to, as more or less as consultants, and we were thinking of a long term, 20 years, more or less a strategic way of planning. But the people we met in the camp dealing with the daily concerns, they were on the operational level. They have a perspective of 1 month. And the deal was to connect them on what we call the tactical level. After this, we were invited in a European project, which actually was about how to deal with a situation where there's a disaster in Europe. And the number they had in the commission was 10,000 people. And we enlarged this during the project to 100,000. That was interesting to see how the different teams from the different countries reacted. People from Italy started to design very smart tents. People from UK started to think of how to register all these people. And the Dutch team started to count. What does it mean? How many trucks, how many building material, how many of this, how many beds, etc., etc. And then we discovered this is a huge logistic problem. And then the next step was to think about what we call the XXL. Suppose there's 1 million casualties or 2 million displaced people. In earthquake areas, flood areas, maybe in nuclear disaster. And then it became even more bigger. And then we discovered it's not about, and that's my message actually, it's not about design, it's about thinking in logistics, as you also quoted, and thinking in time. This is a diagram we used afterwards in many other situations, in the north of Iraq, Kurdistan, but now these days in Turkey. And it's about thinking in a timeline, what's happening tomorrow, what's happening in 1 year, 5 or 10 or later, and what's happening on the several levels of scale. What does it mean for a tent, for a household? What does it mean for the street? What does it mean for a neighborhood? What does it mean for a city or a countryside? This is a scheme we filled in together with the stakeholders in Turkey to get them aware that every timeline step needs interventions on every level of scale. We could tell the way we work only by expressing all these diagrams. I'm not going to do this. But it's about let's say, the selection in using the scenario planning of the right robust investments. It's about taking control in time. And it's not about end phase planning, but it's about a way of planning where you act every year on what's happening at that time to create end value. And then why am I here? I think I'm here because of Gaza. 2 million displaced. We had many talks already. I told, as you did also, it's almost impossible to deal with these issues because, of course, I was shocked, as you all, about the number of casualties, but I was even more shocked about what was destroyed in Gaza. All the vital systems are broke: water, food, shelter, energy. It's probably very polluted because of all those bombs. Economy is down. There's no healthcare anymore, etc., etc. And then Maya asked me what to do about this, and I told her it's impossible. And she said, "Oh, but that's not the answer I want to hear." And then I thought a few days later about President Kennedy, who was told, "We cannot fly to the moon. It's impossible." And he said, "I don't want that to hear. I want another answer. I want to know how to make it possible." And I think that's what we have to do now. My advice would be, and it's, I think, in line with the former speaker, think of a back office. Bring all the expertise needed in this, all the different expertise which is there all around the world in a global network as a kind of back office. Because what I learned in the case of Jordan is that the boots on the ground can do the daily work as an emergency situation, but you need the expertise to come to another way of working to create end value and better living conditions. And I do think that cities, especially cities, it's a daily work to bring all the aspects of an urban area together. Bring them in as well as universities. Open question, of course, is who is going to do this? Who's going to make the needed coordination to realize this? I think killing Kleinsmith, I mentioned him today, he would be the man for the job, by the way. But we also need expertise to solve the problem, as mentioned earlier, how to get this done in a shorter time than you used to do so. Bring back the 12-month period to 2-month periods, using all kinds of digital instruments. Again, cities, it's their daily work, so bring them in. And my last slide actually is asking you to take responsibility for this generation to give them a normal life. Thank you.
Thank you. I would now like to leave you with a few words made by Avi Shlayim, who is an Israeli, British, Iraqi historian, also known as one of the new historians in Israel.
You may have noticed on the list of speakers that I appear as Abraham Shlayim. Abraham is my real name. Avi is the calling name. But for the absence of doubt, I want to make it clear that the Abraham Accords are not named after me. I strongly oppose the Abraham Accords because they are not peace agreements between democratic societies. They are transactional agreements between authoritarian Arab rulers and an apartheid state. As far as the Arab signatories of the Abraham Agreements are concerned, this amounts to a stab in the back to the Palestinians. I'd like to end on a personal note, if I may. I'm an Arab Jew. I was born in Baghdad and I grew up in Israel. My Iraqi birth certificate gives my name, my first name is Ibrahim. So I am the real Ibrahim al-Baghdadi. The other chap is a fake. He stole my identity. I'm proud of my Arab heritage, and I'm equally proud of my Jewish heritage. The three pillars of Judaism are truth, justice, and peace. The Netanyahu government is the opposite of these core Jewish values. It is the most aggressive, expansionist, overtly racist, and Jewish supremacist government in Israel's history. The essence of Judaism is non-violence. The present government is the antithesis of this essence. As a Jew and an Israeli, I therefore feel that I have a moral duty to denounce Zionist settler colonialism and American imperialism, and to stand by the Palestinians in their anti-colonial struggle, in their just struggle to live in peace and dignity on their own land. Thank you for listening.
Then now we move on to an online intervention by Leopold Lambert, who recorded his talk for us.
Good evening, everyone. Thank you so much to include me in this event. I'm recording this little video ahead of the event from my office at The Funambulist, the magazine that I edit. My name is Leopold Lambert. I'm a trained architect. I live in Paris, and part of my work in the last 15 years has been to show and analyze how architecture is an essential tool for the implementation of settler colonialism. And Palestine has been certainly one of the places that I felt this was the truest. And so I've been trying to document the architecture of settler colonialism in Palestine in particular through photos that I took in the last 15 years during 7 visits in Palestine. And I can start the little slideshow. I've mostly done so in the West Bank and in 48 Palestine, but I haven't had the opportunity to go to Gaza. It's been an impossibility for many of us for many years now. So I'm only showing what I've personally seen myself. But of course, when it comes to the architecture of settler colonialism in Palestine, the apartheid wall built in the West Bank during the Second Intifada by the Israeli state is a very important dimension of it, and it might be the most obvious thing we might all have in mind. The wall is very much enduring the splitting of different regions in Palestine. It tries to go as deep as possible within the West Bank to be able to have as many Israeli colonies on the western side of the wall, so on the side of 48 Palestine itself. And of course, it prevents the movement of Palestinians living in the West Bank, in particular through the implementation of checkpoints, whether there are checkpoints on the along the wall itself or within the West Bank, trying to maximize the movement of the settlers and to minimize or even prevent the movements of Palestinians themselves. And of course, only Palestinians with permits are able to cross the walls, and most people don't have a permit, and people who do have to endure this particular architecture of control, but are also people who try to go from one region to another within the West Bank itself might be stopped along the way by those checkpoints. And at a smaller scale in Jerusalem and Al-Khalil in Hebron, we can see some smaller checkpoints as well. The Israeli colonies themselves in the West Bank and in 48 Palestine are, of course, another architectural implementation of settler colonialism, quite literally, home of over 700,000 settlers in the West Bank and East Jerusalem. The architecture of the colonies themselves are very recognizable, as you can see. And I'm sorry. And quite often, they exist in direct proximity of Palestinian villages, which involves quite often settler raids against Palestinian agriculture or people themselves. But of course, the Israeli colonies of the West Bank are not the only one we should look at. The colonies in 48 Palestine, in particular in cities, in Israeli cities such as Haifa here, are very much built on former Palestinian neighborhoods that have been evicted during the 1948 Nakba that displaced over 750,000 people from their land. And the ruins of the Palestinian homes have been taken over by Israeli structures, Israeli architecture, and sometimes those in Lead, for example, here are still there to bear testimony of the Nakba itself, but many have been erased and destroyed to the very last stone, which is particularly important to document as well, the absence of architecture. But very importantly, in the context of an event called Designing Return, I want to point out that the documentation of architecture of settler colonialism in Palestine has a huge risk, which is to produce a visual imaginary of Palestine as a scorched earth place that perhaps is lost forever and can never be gained back. because it's been too much destroyed by settler colonialism. And I want to end with a series of photos that would rather show Palestine and its beauty. But in doing so, I would want all of you to imagine what you're seeing here and what you'll see next, not as photos that I took in the past 15 years in various points of Palestine, but rather as fragments of a liberated future, as if those photos did not come from the past, but came from the future where Palestine is free. And in doing so, I think we can produce an imaginary of liberation rather than one that is stuck on settler colonialism.
I don't think Naomi Wolf is part of a future, imagining a future Palestine. Maybe she will, I don't know. But yes, so now, so thank you, Leopold, wherever you are. And I want to show you a very short clip of Naomi Wolf, an American writer.
How can I live in a society that's just declared that some people are more equal than other people? It's like if you were to ask me, could you live in a Christian America where Congress declared that America's a Christian nation and everyone else doesn't count as much? I would want to get my kids out of that country as quickly as possible. I would go back to report on it if I felt I could do so safely, because obviously I have a responsibility to be there if I'm going to be talking about it, to report on it.
So now I give the microphone back to Ramzi. Take us away.
Hello again. All right, I'll stand again. It's been an interesting evening. I found it really stimulating to listen to Hans and Dean and Lambert. Can't hear you. It's been a stimulating evening. I found it really interesting to listen to Hans and Dean and Lambert. I can't help but question a little bit some of the things I'm hearing. I would like. I just think that we're living right now in such a critical moment. I feel the urgency really is now. That, Hans was talking about scenario planning while building a camp, and Dean spoke to us about how architects can help repurpose rubble as a tool for reconstruction. And Leopold was talking about, extending the imaginary of liberation. It would be nice to do those things now for Gaza, where people are dying because of a man-made crisis. And I would rather repurpose the rubble to reconstruct the villages in Palestine. If rebuilding needs to be done now, it makes sense to rebuild the villages in Palestine where the people in Gaza are from, as opposed to rebuilding the camp. Daniel Levy, it's a pity that clip by Daniel got cut short. He was speaking about, he was asked whether he agrees that Palestinians should have a right to return, and he was saying emphatically yes. I guess I'll go to my first slide, Faiza. Gideon Levy said in the clip that we saw earlier that we already have a single state from the river to the sea. It's just an apartheid state, and that any idea of a two-state solution, or any talk of a two-state solution, is just that. There will be none. The question is, what kind of state will we have? Faiza, could we go to the next? Thank you. So this was done in 2015. for the elections in Israel, and it took a one-state perspective from the river to the sea, who can vote and who cannot. So here we are. This question always comes up when I talk about the one-state solution and one democratic state and making Israel a state for all of its citizens and all of the subjects under the Israeli sovereign. What will happen to the Jews? Unfortunately, many people are more concerned and more preoccupied of what emancipation, liberty, equality, human rights for everyone, and the return of the refugees from Gaza or elsewhere will mean not for the people suffering in refugee camps, but rather for the poor settler colonists who will now have to share their country under a constitution with equal rights for all, and democracy where everyone has the right to vote. So what will happen is that those people in red will also get to vote, and everyone will have to share the country. Gideon Levy, who we saw earlier, he has a column that he writes once a year in Haaretz, where he sits on the editorial board. Because once a year, the Israeli government gives permits to Palestinians in the West Bank to enter into Israel and go to the beach in Tel Aviv, just for the day. And every year, Gideon Levy writes the exact same column where he says, look, these people were allowed to come. They came to the beach. We went to the beach. Everyone was at the beach. The sky didn't fall. We shared the beach for a day, and everything was fine. So, what if that happened for 364 days during the rest of the year? And I think that's what the return of the refugees from Gaza would begin, would be a process of that sort. So moving ahead on the slides, we saw these maps earlier. This is the work of the great Dr. Salman Abu Sitta. He really is a national treasure. Has done impeccable research. These maps are really just skimming the surface of his work. Unfortunately, I don't have maps to show you. He literally has gone village by village, city by city, town by town. And you can see, if you Google his work in the Palestine Land Society, you can see it's remarkable, even on the village level, where Jewish-Israeli settlement has taken place in former Palestinian towns and villages. They have literally built new areas adjacent to where the former Palestinian village used to be. And the lands where the Palestinian villages were remain empty, as if we are waiting for them to return and share their town with their Jewish neighbors. It is possible, it is viable, it is practical. It would make much more sense logistically to do all the scenario planning and all the reconstruction of rubble repurposing techniques and reimagining an imaginary, not for a refugee camp, but for a country, a shared country, perhaps, I don't know, one might say a rainbow nation, to think of another place where similar things occurred. These are some of the things that might happen. Everyone would have a right to justice. There would be economic and social rights, land and property rights, the right to full participation in political decisions in the country. In short, a state for all of its citizens. It doesn't sound so horrible to me. For emphasis, thank you. I want to end by just sharing two quotes with you. The first is from the Black writer Otega Uwagba. She quotes from Noel Ignatieff in her book Whites and Other Falsehoods. She says, "To oppose monarchy does not mean killing the king. It means getting rid of crowns, thrones, royal titles, etc. And I honestly, as much with white supremacy as with Jewish supremacy, to oppose Jewish supremacy between the river and the sea does not mean killing the king. It means getting rid of their crowns, thrones, royal titles, etc. And I'll end with this last quote from the great Salman Abu Sitta from his memoir. He says this in the preface: "It is my firm belief that Zionism's ill deeds in Palestine will come to an end. Regrettably, these deeds have indelibly marked the history of the Jews forever, more than any other event in their history. Every chapter in history tells us that injustice is short-lived, and in Palestine this is no exception. Our task, therefore, in fact the task of every human being with a conscience, is to bring about the day when justice prevails and rights are restored as soon as possible and without killing, suffering, and dispossession. With the genocide happening in Gaza, with a minimum of 1 year just to clear the rubble, that day is now." Thank you.
Thank you. Yuval, I would like to ask you to come here as well. So in a bit, I will open the floor for a Q&A where we have, I'll try to have time at least for 2 rounds of questions. But before we go to the audience, we brought in a new guest here just to inspire us, to give us some new thoughts or inspire us to think maybe again in new directions. But before we start, Yuval, can you tell us a little bit more about who you are? Who are you? Not in the philosophical sense, in the real, like, where did you grow up, where were you born sense.
In a political sense? So my name is Yuval Gal. I've been living here for about 15 years. And I've been involved in creating Erev Rav, which is a Jewish anti-Zionist community in the Netherlands, where we try to really separate Judaism from Zionism, when we try to voice our opposition not only to Israeli policies or Netanyahu or a specific party, but to Zionism in general and to the idea that the Jewish state should even exist. And it's been an incredible journey. We've been growing very, very fast, and we're very proud of it. Yeah.
Thank you. I think that's work that really needs to be done and is very important. Well, as someone who grew up in Israel, who's been involved with anti-Zionism in the Netherlands, listening to the talks of today, what are your main reflections?
I think it's a very important event. I totally agree that the end of the Zionist entity is really near. So it is becoming more and more important to imagine and to plan what will come in place of that. Yes, and so I'm truly inspired.
So Yuval is inspired. I hope the rest is as well. We have Dean still with us, I think, on live. He's there. Maybe he can join us on the screen. So what we will do now is there will be one person with a microphone walking around. If you have a question, you can, raise your hand. If I tell her she can go to you, then you can ask your question. Speak into the microphone, make it short and brief, because we have a lot of people and we're supposed to end in 7 minutes, but I'm going to smuggle in a little bit more. But yes, let's give space for as many people as possible. So you can ask questions to Dean, Umayya, Hans, Ramzi, and Yuval. Leopold isn't here. Naomi Wolf isn't either, and Gideon Levy, unfortunately. Well, Naomi Wolf I don't miss, actually, because she became weird lately, no? That's another discussion. Anyway, so are there any questions from the audience? Please raise your hands. Can we just see where they are so we know how to take them? Okay, so then we'll have 3 on this side, and then we'll move. Okay, yes, so the first 3. She will keep on holding the microphone, so please don't hold the microphone.
Thanks, everyone, for your input. I have one question to Hans. We are talking about, I hope, for a future situation that we can rebuild Palestine. One thing that is also very much in discussions usually is the self-determination of Palestinians. And I a bit of miss the input or the link to Palestinians' thoughts about how to rebuild, except for Ramses. But where are the Gazans? Where are the people that lost their homes? Where are their ideas about their future?
Thank you. We'll take 2 more questions and then we'll turn it back. So there was here, yeah.
Hi, yeah, I'm not sure whether this is directed to Ramsey or Umaya, whoever wants to take it. If we agree that one democratic state is the destination, what are the steps that we need to take to get there? Because there are some power structures that stand in the way, Israeli power and the Western backers of it. Like, how can we make this happen?
Thank you. We'll take 1 more question. There was another question on this side. Okay, the first and another one. Well, then first we'll go to the back because there was a question before in the back, if that's possible. I'll try to do it also by who raised their hands first, if that's okay. And then next round we'll start there and come back here.
Thank you very much. I had a question for Ramses. I think it is very logical what you say, return. There are many million Palestinians to be returned, that's right. But how to do it? And that is exactly the preceding question. I mean, everything is balanced by powers. And the major power is the United States, I think. And if there is a future for Palestinians, there should be a negotiation with the United States to reduce their support. Thank you.
Thank you. Actually, before, can we also give the gentleman here, and then we'll answer, and then if you can walk to the other side for the next round, then you're prepared. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. I think this one is for Ramsey Moore. Do you think that reaching the end-line vision of a one state for all also involves collaborating with people, organizations within Israel or Palestine that are operating towards the same goal, as in Land for All or other organizations within Israel that are calling for the same one?
Thank you. Okay, let's get back to here. Maybe we'll start first with Hans and anyone else who also has ideas about self-determination and what do Palestinians want and their thoughts about the future.
Yeah, I'm only 1 month in discussion with Umaya about this question now. But I can tell you some of my experiences in Jordan, especially in Amman, in the area I showed, Baqa, where I met several Palestinian leaders of that area. And the major thing I remember is exactly what Ramsey was telling, is going home. So they still consider the area where they live is not theirs. They want to go home. And that's the first thing. And the second thing is that when I started in Jordan, it took me 4 months, to understand the commission, the task, what was needed. And that was a moment where, for myself, I thought there are 4 things elementary. One, of course, is what's called sources. In this case, it's water, it's food, it's shelter. The emergency phase. I didn't suggest to make camps, by the way. I don't have the answer yet. I think we need a lot of expertise to avoid making camps, making it a better situation. But how is not only to me. We need more people and experts in this. The second thing was economy. That's what I also learned in Zaatari. As soon as people get a chance to work, to build their own income, and to negotiate, and to act, and to interact, very important. And the third thing was connectivity. And it was surprising me that in every tent, where there's only food and water, there was a television, because they wanted to be connected with the world, with the family, etc. It's very essential. But the fourth thing, called existentialism. I saw people coming in the camp, lost everything. And actually, and only after months, they started to behave like humans again, to feel I'm important. And so I thought that's the fourth thing we have to keep in mind, and I think that's the, you asked me what is the way people can interact. I would say mirror them. They are important. They are still alive. They have a meaning in life. They have a family, etc. That's existential. I am who I am. The more important than to be interacting with the case.
Thank you. Ramzi will go to you.
I wanted to toss to Maya first on that question of power before I picked up, because I can say a lot, but I think we've also talked about it. Did you want to jump in on that, Omaya, or not?
About power?
On how to affect change.
We missed the ambassador of South Africa. He had the answer. It was so, we really, I felt even physically sick when he said he cannot make it, because South Africa shows us that you pass. You do pass. It happens. It's impossible until it's done. They've done it. And the whites are now, when now the black South African ambassador was sitting with the ICJ advisors, they were white and he was black. And it's not like a silly story. It's not naive, but it's done. It is done. And not only alone, so one of their advices was, the international community is your tool. That is your tool. And you here, coming here, this is a room filled by 300 people. This is the change. One other thing was that your purse is your tool. So you choose where you put your money. You choose, and so we didn't see Ilan Pape, but Ilan Pape was saying that 98% of the whites in South Africa, until the last day, did not believe in the change. They did not believe in the change. But they could not travel anywhere. Nobody was coming to sing there. There's no football. They lost all their beautiful paradise. And they had to. You have to. Nobody gives up their, nobody gives up their privilege. But I would like to hear from Yuval, how do you see that we can get the Israeli Jews at least prepare for the change that they're going to have to do, not choose?
Well, first of all, I want to say I'm really surprised, or maybe I shouldn't be surprised, but still I'm surprised. There are actually a lot of Hebrew-speaking people right now in the crowd, and so there is really reason to be optimistic. There's a few people I recognize, there's a few people I don't recognize. So you do see a movement right now already with ex-Israelis and Jews living outside of Palestine, but small movements and small radicalizations, which I think Zohar also referenced, also in Palestine 48. I also want to talk about the negotiation, the concept of negotiation. I think we are definitely not we should not negotiate. The time for negotiation is finished, and we have to demand from politicians, from cultural institutions, from academic institutions, not only to boycott Israel for its current policies or for past policies or for settlements in the West Bank, but to boycott Israel for what it is. It has always been an apartheid state. It has always been a settler colony. And so we have to change our demand completely 180 degrees. And that would also change the... And hopefully, those of us who are here, who speak Hebrew and have family and friends there, we have to, carry the message to them, although it's incredibly difficult.
Can you answer in 1 minute? All 3, 4, 5 questions.
In 1 minute, power only concedes in the face of other forces of power, and we have a lot more power than we think we do, and we're not using it. This morning, I was in Albert Heijn, and there were these beautiful dates, and every single package was from Israel. And for example, the boycott is just right in front of our eyes. People are marching, people are speaking out. We need to use the full force of people power and not let up. We choose the way we vote with our dollar or our euro. We choose what issues that we raise in front of politicians. We choose all the time in 100 million different ways, and we need to choose, because we are all responsible. Palestine is a global issue. The first question was about Palestinian institutions. Rashid Khalidi has spoken at great length about the absolute destruction of Palestinian institutions. We are fragmented, spread around the world. The Palestinian Authority does not speak in our name. It is a quizzling, collaborationist tool of the Israeli security services, and also in charge of garbage collection in Ramallah. That's about it. So I mean, we cannot rely on anything that purports to speak on behalf of all the Palestinian people, because there is no national institution that speaks on behalf of us at the moment. And that is a measure of the lengths towards which apartheid and settler colonialism has been so effective in destroying us as a political nation. But we do remain as a people, and we count on the support of other people around the world whose governments are sending arms to attack the Houthis in Yemen. Because they dared to block international commerce, but they will not stop sending arms and providing diplomatic cover for Israel as it continues to engage in a genocide. So we who are represented by these governments all around the world need to pressure our leaders through every tool available to us, and to speak out and to listen to Palestinians where we can and ally with them. And of course, Palestinians must ally with Israelis on the ground wherever they can, and whatever few number that there are, hopefully growing. But truly, this is a globally networked issue. And in order to fight against this global power which is being brought to bear on the Palestinian people, it is the people of the world that must rise up together and exert their power against that power.
Yuval wants to make another point. Sure.
Sorry, I want to talk about the collaboration between Israelis and Palestinians again, because this has been actually part of this broader discussion in the pro-Palestine movement, and the call of BDS to, or the Palestinian part of BDS to boycott Standing Together. So I want to say it's definitely very important to collaborate, but I think it's very important that the movement is Palestinian-led. Also in South Africa, there's always been white people. There's always been white people at the ANC. By the way, a lot of Jews as well. But it was always black-led, and that's also important when Israelis or ex-Israelis or Jewish people try to be allies. It's important that we give Palestinians the leadership and ask them what you need from us, and not,
okay.
Not the other way around.
So we still had one question about the steps that we need in order to get to this one state, but we'll park it for now. Maybe later we can still answer it. I think I have 3 hands on this side. 1, 2, 3. Okay, so we'll do this, and then I don't think we'll have more time afterwards, so let's do those 3.
Earlier, you were talking about that it is possible to live in a one-state. The one-state solution is possible, looking at South Africa. But the major countries were the United States and the UK that were opponents of the apartheid. And with the coming elections, with Trump probably being chosen, how are we, as a society, can still bring some change, because we all know that Trump is not really, how do you call it? As a one-state solution, let's put it like.
Trump is against any solution, except unless it's making him great. So maybe if you make him look great, it can happen. Okay, question noted. We had another hand in the middle. Yes, that sounds all right.
Sorry, I'm combining by what Hans was saying with what Leopold was saying about the permanence of the architecture structure. So having this in mind, and that the current architecture structure is of the dominance of the settlers upon the Palestinians, then I wonder how can we change this? How can the scenarios that Hans had models about thinking of evolving scenarios, and how can this be applied to make this change? And at the very beginning of this this evening, it was said there would not be it would be without any displacement. Well, I'm not that sure it's achievable in this way. But.
Thank you. Then we had in the front here, the gentleman.
After wars, justice needs to be done for anyone who wants to take this question. It requires payment and it requires justice, like a tribunal. Although Tutu has shown us how you can continue to communicate and to find truth. So would you describe some of those parts of this future I'm mentioning?
Yes, thank you. Before we come to the panel here, Dean, do you want to answer any of the questions, or you have any thoughts about the questions being asked?
Maybe not these were, but the initial question that I think was asked, that was about what also Palestinian Gazans think and their perspectives, and Palestinians more broadly. And but I think for Open Gaza as well, the impetus of that book was also a collaboration with those in Gaza to talk about the reconstruction, and of course any reconstruction that happens, or any ideas of rebuilding and the forward-looking process that happens once there's that opening, has to be with those impacted. But it also has to emphasize the incredible difficulty and the shutting off and closing down, the blockade of land, sea, and air, and what a struggle it was with the Open Gaza project to build those connections, and the enormous effort that has gone by Israeli to shut down those communication networks. And again, why this event is so important, and what Amaya was saying, and that how wonderful it is to see a room packed, and the focus that's been placed, and the efforts that are all being talked about, how important this is, and to keep going, basically, is my kind of concluding comment. And that impetus to open up Gaza and Palestine, and to build these connections, and to elevate Palestinian voices, has been also said by my fellow panelists, just to echo that sentiment and really reinforce it as well.
Thank you. Who wants to go first from here? Hans.
Yeah, that was the most easy question, I think, to address than the others. But I told earlier, the first phase is an emergency phase, and that gives you the time to think over what's coming next. And I didn't say it, but the first phase, the UNHCR, you can't beat them. It's like an army. Only an army can do this, like the UNHCR. And the second step is, maybe I can answer by telling how we do this, how my colleague is doing this in Turkey. In the earthquake area, there are 3 regions, 3 big cities, of let's say 200,000, 250,000 people. And the scenario method I mentioned, but as well the matrix way of talking and investigating, is done together with the local people. So there's only instruments to be able to talk it over. What is your identity? What is your local idea about how to do this? And that's how we actually came to what we call robust investments. What is in every scenario anyhow a wise decision to invest? Or it also acted as a kind of a mirror what the people actually would like to do. And maybe it's the situation comparable in Palestine, but the issue in Turkey is that the central government is controlling everything by financing everything. And that is the battle going on there. What is the local need and what can be done from the central state? But if you ask about the local issues, that's the discussion you have to go. And in this case of the huge numbers of Gaza, and it's even more wider, I think, if you take into account also the West Bank, it's a huge issue, and maybe not one issue as a whole. I can imagine that there are several different issues if you consider it locally. But that's the thing, and that's also an answer, I think, to the first question. Use your instruments to get in contact with the people living there. And another thing, of course, is use the lessons learned in other situations. Don't start over again, but use the solutions already there.
I want to reiterate some of the things I said earlier, but I'll make it brief because there's a connection. It feels like a lot of the questions are going back to what we discussed earlier. So on the third point, it is inevitable. You know, a lot of the questions you ask, recompensation, truth and reconciliation, these will all follow through in due time once the initial dynamic is set in motion. What we're in right now is in a supremacist, repressive dynamic, and we just need to switch that cycle, and then all those details will flow forth. Would be the first thing. The second thing I'd say is that one state is inevitable. We already have one state. The question is, how many people will die and be killed before Israel concedes the vote to its Palestinian subjects? That's the question. How many will they kill? And the third point on sort of the first question that was back there. I want to repeat that this is a global issue and that we're all involved. It's not, and say that it's not for nothing that Israel is overwhelmingly preoccupied with the question of delegitimization. There is no policeman in the world, there is no military force in the world that likes to be laughed at, that likes to be seen as an evildoer. Everyone wants to be seen as the hero. Changing the Overton window. We don't control, I don't own a newspaper, right? But every time we write back a letter to the editor, we send a petition to government, we speak out on social media, we share, we speak to our friends. So we slowly change the Overton window of what is politically acceptable to say and what is not politically acceptable to say. And this is extremely important. And the last thing I want to say is on the question of being Palestinian-led and listening to Palestinian voices. I completely agree. However, as a Palestinian, I give you all permission to go out and speak for defending the basic human rights of my people. Go forth and be brave. Thank you.
Great. Umayya has one final thought. Maybe you can also just tell us, Umayya, what is your final reflection on the event, because you put so much work and effort into it.
The aim of this meeting was to connect the people who are sitting alone at home on the TikTok. The ambassador of South Africa said he has never been as addicted, he knew what TikTok is, because that's where we're getting our truth. And we need to connect with love. We need to be reminded that we are people who are looking for love and happiness, that we are the people who are really looking for more love. And we need to connect and feel our power together and not only be reactionists. And we need to remember not to reinvent the wheel, practically, and also we need to look, Ireland did it. And South Africa did it. And South Africa is doing more. They're paying a lot of, it's an expensive exercise what they're doing for them. And they are behind us. We have a model. We can criticize it, what the post-apartheid was, but we can also borrow some ideas, some mechanisms, some anti-apartheid movement. And for this, I want to revive one thing. I want to revive the Mandela, the South African power and freedom. And we can take it from the first lands, from our first continent, to any country, but Mandela to Palestine, Mandela people.
I was suggesting to go to drinks afterwards, but we can also just start a demonstration outside if you want, and you'll be the leader. I want to thank everyone for coming here. I want to thank the panelists. Dean is gone, but I hope you're still listening. Thank you all for contributing. Thank you for being here. We also had people following us on live stream today. Thank you all for watching. We have almost. We have another event organized by Justice for Palestine on Wednesday, the 17th of April. It's called Deleted Histories, 14 Underground Women in Jaffa, Oranges and Newspapers. You can look up the program at dezwijger.nl. You can become a friend of Pakhuis de Zwijger if you want to become a friend. Because we're also, of course, very grateful that we were able to hold this event here and that they didn't cower in the face of empty threats. So thank you, Pakhuis, for having us. As I said, the idea was to continue our talks downstairs, so please feel free to come and talk to anyone and you still have questions for. And power to everyone. Good night.